All right, why don't we proceed? We're waiting for one of the panel members, but if there's a question for any of the other panel members, could we proceed with that? Senator Urgan, did you want to?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon again, colleagues, and to our guests who are in the room. I'm looking at the document that was referenced by the speaker a little earlier, the Consolidated Revenue and Expenditures Report, General Fund.
I'm sorry, Senator Urgan. Yes. We're waiting for the BBMR representative. So if there's another question.
But I believe this document was signed by all three
all right, then.
representatives, okay. Madam Chair. So
okay.
either one of the representatives from either BBMR, DOA, or Reverend Tax can respond to it. But
and
if you would like...
And here he is. So please proceed, Senator Urgan.
Okay. In all fairness, if you would like me to hold off on asking questions with regards to this?
It's okay. Please proceed.
Okay. Madam Chair, this is a document that shows that as of the date that this was submitted, there was $37,278,179 in which would show a decrease in revenues versus the adopted revenue projection in fiscal year 18. So we're talking about $37 million, Madam Chair. Now, the figure that was provided on two separate occasions with regards to the executive branch cost reduction or cost containment was approximately $15 million. Please correct me if, in fact, the figures that I'm throwing out are incorrect. So the executive branch is anticipating a cost reduction or cost containment of approximately $15 million in anticipated expenses. The judiciary has already publicly come out and stated that they've identified a reduction in their anticipated expenditure level of approximately $3.6 million. The legislature was given a reduction of approximately $1 million, inclusive of OFB, the Office of Finance and Budget. So that's approximately $19.6 million in cost reductions versus the anticipated revenue for the entire fiscal year. Now, I hate to go this way because really, when we're looking at education and public safety, those two components should be a priority when it comes to expenditures. But I want to, Madam Chair, if I may, ask the superintendent, in terms of non-classroom cost reduction, and I specifically say that, Mr. Superintendent, non-classroom instructional cost reductions within the Guam Department of Education, what figure are you looking at this point in time?
Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Senator. So I think we've said it publicly. In going through a phase one reduction, we said that we could, we estimated that we could save $12 million. And the way we would do it, I can't say if it's non-classroom reduction. A lot of it's just foregoing anticipated spending. So things like delaying the expansion of pre-K, which was a priority of ours, we said we could hold it off at least until we settle this situation, which is about $1 million. Another priority, which we don't want to have to do, but it's textbooks. We have textbook funds that have not been spent yet. That's $1.5 million. We are redirecting some of the special funds that are dedicated to the Healthy Futures funds, the Passport funds. That's another $1 million. And so we're looking at reducing our contractual services. That we have to do very carefully, just because of the fact that a lot of these are, custodial and so forth. But in trying to do that, we want to save another 1.2, 1.5, and so on and so forth. So I think the total amount, which was outlined in my letter, including the central office hiring freeze, would get us to about $12 million. That also incorporates around $700,000 of cuts that the charters are taking, as well as a proportionate share of the reductions. It would also, there's other issues such as delaying the onboarding of substitutes at the beginning of the year, anticipated to save about $700,000. So there's a mix of things. I wouldn't say they're all non-classroom related. It's really about trying to push spending that we otherwise would absorb in fiscal year and try to see if we can live without it until we get to the end of this period and find a solution.
Thank you very much. And just for clarification purposes, these are non-classroom related with the exception of pre-K.
Well, textbooks are classroom related, so
anticipated cost reductions, inclusive of the textbooks.
right. So textbooks, I would say pre-K. I would say the onboarding of substitutes would be three that would be are directly related to classrooms. But those are things that we're figuring if we can push them a little bit, we can live without if need be.
Okay, and thank you very much, Mr. Superintendent. And Madam Chair, I hope that you and our colleagues can follow me on this one. So rather than, I'm just throwing out a hypothetical. And realistically, because DOE, we know, is a priority within our government. So rather than a $12 million cost reduction, if I look at, let's say, $6 million, based on your evaluation, the judiciary, well, the executive branch, the judiciary, the legislature, 19.6, DOE, approximately 6.0. So that would be $25.6 million in cost, anticipated cost reduction for the balance of this fiscal year. We're just talking fiscal year 18, 25.6. I know that part of this reductions is inclusive, maybe inclusive, and I need a clarification on this. Part of the $15 million is inclusive of our public safety law enforcement agencies. Is that correct?
The $15 million, the department, the Guam Police Department could not provide any cost savings due to their mandates. The Guam Fire Department, and I believe I mentioned this previously, they were given about a $2.5 million request for reductions, and while they provided a roadmap for how that would be done, I think Deputy Chief San Nicolas has gone on record as saying it's going to come with some dire reductions that are not anything anybody here wants to see. So, and then corrections.
So I need
they said no.
Can I get a direct response in regards to the $15 million anticipated cost reduction? Is that inclusive of the figure that was extended to the Guam Police Department, inclusive of the Guam Fire Department? You just said Guam Fire Department provided you with a roadmap of how they could conceivably contribute to cost reduction. So,
with consequences, with dire consequences.
Okay, so the $15 million is exclusive of the Guam Police Department. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. $15 million is inclusive of the Guam Fire Department.
With caveats and
what is that figure?
The number for the fire department is 2.7, and if I could read what they said the Guam Fire Department has noted that in order to make the required reduction of over 2.7 million, the Guam Fire Department would have to, 1, cancel recruitment of 5 critically needed civilian positions, saving $246,000, terminate or shut down 3 fire stations, fire truck services provided by Talafofo, Estumbo, and Umatic, and redistribute personnel to other fire stations to augment critical manpower shortages, anticipated overtime savings of 2.1, and reduce operational expenditures on special funds through cost containment measures to realize savings to be used to absorb general fund expenditures of $387,000.
Okay, then let me Madam Chair, if I may. I mean, I came up with an initial figure of $25 million, but there's about approximately 2.7 with the fire department, and that's part of the law enforcement. And then Department of Corrections was not inclusive in that $15 million. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So 25.6 minus the 2.7. So we're looking at approximately 22.9 at this point in time in terms of anticipated cost reductions, with all the qualifiers that I threw in as part of the conversation. Now, based on the 37 million, and we'll just go with 22, so your actual cash requirement just for fiscal year 17 with all of this discussion with cost reductions, taking away the Guam Fire Department's figure that you threw in there, looking at DOE as reducing that $12 million to $6 million. So we're looking at $15 million in possible cash shortfall. If all those cost reductions are realized.
And you're basing that figure against what figure?
Against a $37 million shortfall in the revenue projection, based on your CRER.
The tracking of the CRER. Yeah. That's just the tracking, correct?
No, I understand.
Yeah.
But this is information that originated from
Yes.
yourself, from
Right.
the administration.
Right.
So, Madam Chair, I threw that out there just as a situation where, in fact, we recognize that things are fluctuating. I want to go to as rev and tax. Since January of this year, what additional efforts above and beyond has rev and tax undertaken in regards to tax collections, outstanding tax collections?
Thank you for the question, Senator Argun. We've been aggressively collecting from our accounts receivable, aggressively collecting from all taxes that are coming in. I'm sorry, as I mentioned in the previous SEA and the Tax Commission meetings, have been, revenue tax has been aggressively collecting from the accounts receivables. I believe that every receivable out there that we collect, contributes to the revenue, and we continue to basically try to get people in the 30 positions that basically that was given for this fiscal year. We're trying to recruit them moving forward. So those are the things that we're doing.
So since January 1st, which is approximately 52 days ago, aside from status quo aggressive efforts on the part of all of your personnel at Reverend Tax, there hasn't been too much progress in getting additional personnel support. And I say that because it goes back to one of my discussions or one of my comments during the course of the public hearing about looking at some of these agencies and functions and reassigning personnel and cross-training them so that rather than hiring new personnel, the government does not assume any additional costs, but we accomplish your objective. And your objective is to receive or to have the personnel necessary so that they can actually go out there and aggressively collect on outstanding tax receivables.
We've done this in the past where we basically, transfer some employees from the different departments to revenue and tax. But this job that we do is a specialized area. In collection, for example, or in exam, for example, that we do, we go to several trainings with our employees in order to learn the provisions and all the laws on collections, or whether in audit or in tax. So it takes a while. So,
but Mr.
we
Camacho,
did, yes, we did.
Even if you were to go out and acquire or hire new personnel, they would still have to go through that extensive process. So what I'm saying is that if there are some functions and agencies and entities that are either providing duplicative services or functions, and these personnel can be reassigned to Reverend Tax to provide you the support you need, rather than incurring an additional expense on the part of the government, that's what I'm alluding to. Let me ask on the another question, Madam Chair, with regards to the reimbursements to the general fund of payments that were advanced for bond obligations. What are you looking at in terms of the month of February is the real estate property tax payments. So what are you looking at in reimbursement to the general fund for funds that were advanced as a result of the payment of bond obligations, and as well as lease payments in December?
Thank you, Senator. Senator, as you probably already know, our bond payments are our number one priority. Can you hear me? Our bond payments are our number one priority. We are up to date in terms of paying all our debts and making our bond payments. in terms of what was your question? Reimbursement?
The question is, you advance payments on bond obligations. One of it is to DOE, and then also a lease payment in December for DOE's rental or lease
Right.
of the property. Now you're going to get reimbursed by the Territorial Education Facilities Funds. So what is that reimbursement amount?
I don't have that amount with me right now, Senator. What I can tell you is that
So what did the government of Guam pay out in terms of the education bond? What was the debt service paid out the early part of the fiscal year?
Senator, I don't know. I don't have that information. All I can tell you is that on a weekly basis, every single week, we pay out all our debts on time and in the full amount that's
Mr.
needed.
Ariola, that doesn't answer my question.
I don't have that amount,
because
Senator.
The general fund traditionally advances payment on behalf
understand.
of the Department of Education. In the month of February, and I believe there's one other month when real estate taxes are received, the general fund gets reimbursed for those payments that were advanced on behalf of the Department of Education for the bond obligation as well as the lease payments. So what are those two amounts that will be reimbursed to the general fund upon the conclusion of the month of February? So that's one question, Madam Speaker, a twofold question that I certainly would like to request we get responses for.
All right.
The other question, follow-up question I have is with regards to reducing costs. I know that there was reference made about the Executive Order 2012-01, that some of those cost containment and cost reduction initiatives are being revisited. Now, the response that you provided, Mr. Ariola, about only critical purchase orders are being considered, personnel, critical positions, obviously law enforcement, education, and healthcare fall in that category. Contracts with the copiers. It sounds as if, in fact, it's all discretionary. So is there an initiative or a document from either the governor of Guam or yourself or BBMR that highlights exactly what is authorized for the balance of the fiscal year to realize the $15 million cost reduction?
Well, we have again, as we have mentioned numerous times, we have the BBMR circular that went out. That is very specific as to what is being held back in terms of cost reductions.
No, but it sounds as if, in fact, it's very discretionary. And, you know, Madam Chair, let me conclude by saying this. I mean, I throw out numbers in regards to the anticipated shortfall, the cost reductions that could be realized as a result of the government tightening our belts and streamlining services. I was not too pleased with hearing that, in fact, the Reverend tax, we haven't looked at other ways in terms of utilizing existing personnel within our government so that we can streamline services, get them reassigned, and provide that necessary support to Reverend tax rather than hiring additional personnel. And then also the reduction in costs. We haven't seen specifics in terms of what agencies and how it would impact agencies, each of the individual executive branch agencies. So right now, at this point in time, I have some serious concerns about the nature of the responses in light of DOE stepping forward and saying they have conducted an analysis and this is how much they could conceivably reduce overall costs. Non-classroom instruction overall costs, with the exception of textbooks as well as pre-K. And it really concerns me, Madam Speaker, that we're asking now to ask the consumers and the people of Guam to bear the burden and the cost of paying more taxes to this government, increasing the business privilege tax by 50%, 2 percentage points. And this is going to affect the entire island community. And that's why when I look at these numbers and I look at some of the actions and the decisions, there's got to be more that we can do. We must find really a different way of staying away from sticking it to our people. And some of these numbers show me that, yes, we can still chip away without having to go out to the community and ask our everyday people out there to bear the burden of a tax increase, because we all know it's going to lead to an increase in the cost of living. So, Madam Chair, I do not support a tax increase where the burden is going to be laid on the entire island community, and we do not make those hard decisions of looking at initiatives. There's two other initiatives that have been proffered by members of this legislature, if I may, without offending any of our colleagues. I know Senator St. Nicholas had a revenue generating initiative that was recently introduced. There was also an initiative that was introduced recently by Senator Espaldon to be able to realize some cost savings by the government of Guam. These are things that we need to seriously look at before we ask our everyday people out there and our small businesses to incur an increase in any taxes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Organ. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a question about the percentages that we were discussing earlier. So if, let's say, GRT collections come in below the projected levels, where does that 0.75% for GMH or the 0.25% for DOE, where does that start? So let's say we appropriate $100 and we only receive $50. Where does that 0.75 begin to apply? I'm just concerned about using the percentages. Does it apply after we meet the projected amount and then they get the remainder?
Thank you very much. That's actually a very good question, because it basically has to follow the rules established by the bond. So when $4 is received by the Department of Administration, Treasurer of Guam, $3 automatically goes through the trustee until they get enough money to be able to satisfy the debt service for that particular month, and then the rest of it flows to the government for operations. The 1% that's not pledged goes straight to the general fund for taking care of the obligations of the government. So the 2% would not be pledged to the bonds. The 2% would come in, and then they would be automatically allocated in the percentages as provided out in Bill 245. So of the 2% that would be received, that is not part of the debt service. So you'd have actually 3% that would go straight to the government of Guam. 1% would go to the general operations, and the other 1% would be split 0.25, whatever that amount is, would go to the Department of Education, and 0.75 would be allocated to the Guam Memorial Hospital. So there is a mechanism of being able to split the receipts when they come in to fill the different accounts that will be established by DOA, so that the funds can be properly accounted for. So dollar per dollar, it'll be slotted in accordingly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carlson. Is BPT collecting? Is it meeting the present collections for fiscal year 2018, the budget?
It's tracking a little bit less than projected, but that is a point of time information. It's cyclical. There's more money spent in the summer. There's more money spent certain times of the year. So. But it looks like it's going to be pretty close to the adopted level.
Okay. Should Bill 245 not pass, what remedies or actions would the executive branch have if we don't take action today? Does he have statutory authority to, I guess, avert a payless payday? What would the next step be?
Excuse me, I was looking at the wrong side of the page when I answered that last question. Our tracking for BPT, it's actually tracking probably at 240-ish level as opposed to the adopted 254. So it's tracking a little bit below projected and adopted revenues right now.
So 240
Right,
versus 254.
that's correct.
And then I'll just restate my question. So, what remedies or actions would the executive branch have should we not be able to pass this bill today?
Thank you, Senator. As I mentioned earlier, our top priority are our bond payments. First $3 go to the bond payments and our debt service. Then, of course, we have salaries. Then we have allotments. Then we have vendor payments. By law, we're required to pay salaries as well. But assuming we don't have the cash, vendor payments are going to start to pile up. Over the last 2 years, we were very fortunate through strong cash management procedures. We brought it down from as high as 180 down to the 90 to 100 day schedule. That will increase dramatically. We will do everything we can to make payroll, to make allotments to judiciary, to the legislature, GCC and UG, to the hospital to try to make sure that they make payroll as well. So it's really all about what comes in. And our tracking, it's VBMR's tracking, it's OFB's tracking, and it's the public auditor's tracking that we are going to be short by $67 million. That money we know that money is not going to come in.
Thank you. Mr. Carlson, going back to my previous question, would you fill the fiscal year 2018 appropriations before you fill the 1% to DOE and to GMH? What's the timing on that?
Could you repeat that?
Would you take care of the fiscal year 2018 appropriations before you fill the 1% that's divvied up, the 0.75% to the hospital and 0.25% to DOE? What would you take care of first?
If we're mandated to pay 75% of dedicated BBT revenues coming in, we have to pay that. Yeah, and then the rest just stays with the general fund. So again, say in a given month, let's just take March. It starts March 1st. At the end of March, if say 100,000 comes in the increase, 100,000 comes in, 75,000 goes to the hospital, 25,000 goes to DOE for their capital improvements.
Is there any new information that you can share with us? Any questions that maybe were not asked during the public hearing, the extensive public hearings? Is there any new information that you can share with us since last night?
Yeah, thank you very much for that opportunity. I'd like to go back to what Senator Uggan had asked for, which were specifics from the agencies. I will remind everybody that we provided all the agency responses to the speaker at the SES, and the speaker said that it was too voluminous to be able to photocopy and that he would scan it and was going to send it to every senator electronically. So, Senator Uggan, the specifics that you were asking for, you should have had at least since the February 13th meeting, shortly right thereafter. They were provided by us.
Mr. Speaker, in this particular case, if I may, Senator, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, in this particular case, the question is, has all of that information been accepted by the governor of Guam? Because he just alluded to $2.7 million allocated for cost reduction under the Guam Fire Department. My question is that what the governor of Guam now is insisting will be part of the cost reduction? He just mentioned that GPD was an exception, rightfully so. They're law enforcement, because they came back and they said they cannot absorb any additional cuts.
And DOC.
So in this particular case, you can provide the chairman of appropriations and the speaker all the information that you receive from the agencies, but what is the governor charging forward with? What is he accepting as part of the cost reduction. Because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, if we accept the $15 million figure, and part of that is $2.7 million, and the Umatic Fire Station is shut down, and the Talofofo Fire Station is shut down, or the Estumbo Fire Station is shut down, who's going to get hit? Who is going to be questioned about shutting down those Guam Fire Department fire stations other than them trying to divert it to this legislative body? That's why it's got to be owned by the governor of Guam, whatever is transmitted to you, whether in fact those are realistic cost reductions that you will implement as a result of this discussion and this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Senator. Sorry.
Senator, you're asking whether or not we're going to, if there was a way to avert this to happen, we will certainly, to use your favorite word, certainly avoid that. What you're asking is what are the consequences, and I'm trying to let you know what the consequences potentially would be. We're going to avert whatever we can avert. We will try to make sure that this community is safe. I cannot stress that enough. This is not a blame game. We're trying to be here and work together.
Mr. Speaker, I'm done with my statements.
Mr. Carlson, I'd just like to reiterate my question. So is there any new information that you can share with this body that may make a difference in a vote on Bill 245?
I think everybody that has testified yesterday, that has been before you, has eloquently and emphatically stated what we believe we need to do. And I would be remiss if I did not go back to the 2 SES meetings. And remember, this is a mandated working group to assist in the formulation of policy. That's exactly what the SES is.
Yes, I attended.
And thank you very much for that. And the conclusion that was reached was that we need cash now. That the BPT was viewed by everybody as the most efficient way to replace the cash that is already being lost due to the withholding already being realized and the savings that our people are enjoying because of this tax act. It's going to be compounded further because corporations are going to be putting less as far as monthly estimated and the quarterly required payments. So we really do need to supplement the loss ASAP.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. If there's no new information, Mr. Speaker, maybe we can have the majority leader motion to rise out of the committee of the whole. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's 2 questions here. Senator Nelson, then Vice Speaker, and then I'll entertain the question that was...
Mr. Speaker, if I may, just a point of information, I did request some information from DOA. So I don't know if he's reaching out to his personnel to provide that information to the body of how much Senator, the Territorial Education Facilities Fund is going to reimburse the general fund as a result of advancing bond payments. So please, if we can get that, hopefully before the conclusion of this conversation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have 2 quick questions, just to clarify something that was brought up earlier. In the CRER, the Consolidated Revenue Expenditure Report, they said there was a $37 million shortfall, but in the attachment that was given to us, we are anticipating a $67 million shortfall from the tax cuts. Is that is the $37 million on top of the 67?
No, it's not.
Okay.
This is a tracking the $37 million. The $67 million is a cumulative amount that was gleaned primarily from the real world data collected again by OFB on the withholding, because we actually thought the withholding was 3%, and we were because just a little bit of history, that the bill was signed in the States on the 29th of December, the 30th here. The IRS didn't put out the new tax tables until January 12th. So we were kind of like, we really we had an idea, but we didn't know until the IRS posted the old rates for your income, right, and then the new rates juxtaposed on their website. Right after that is when we started getting into discussions about what we thought it would be, and then the SES was called on the 31st, and we shared our collective thoughts with the OPA, who again in her projection came up with the same number. So this is a process of refining. So this is our revenue tracking, and it's different than what it is that we fully anticipate the adopted revenue to go down by.
So is there a possibility of it being more, the shortfall, the 67 million?
I don't believe so. Okay. I think that's the high end. Just remember, that's just for this fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. I just have another question. The BBMR did a circular, the 18-04 for all the government agencies, and in this circular, it shows that the agencies that did not respond, but it's going to be required to, I guess, do their form of the pro rata share, and DOE is having to put forth $18 million. And as discussed yesterday, we talked about that this is going to hinder operations. The good superintendent had a list of programs that would have to be cut with the expansion of the pre-kindergarten in our schools, cost-cutting measures for utility, and also a hiring freeze, CTO time, voluntary demotions, daily reclassifications, limitation on promotions, limited authority to detail employees. And there were some questions raised also if we also anticipate and this is just a $12 million resolve here, you're still looking for another $6 billion you have to cut. So, I've spoken with some DOE employees, and they're getting word from their leadership that there is a possibility that schools will close down. This is just over the course of the evening. And so perhaps you can explain that, because I think there's also a concern within the agency that schools are going to be shut down, people are going to be relocated and such, and that really wasn't established in yesterday's public hearing. So, Mr. Superintendent, and then I have one more question after that, and then we're done. Thank you.
Sure. Let me just answer that for the record and for all who are here, because I know there was a news story about some apprehension by parents of Chief Brody about the future of their school. So we did go down to Maritza last night, and when we go to Agada and Liguan on Central and North to speak to stakeholders, we are letting them know that unless they hear word directly from the superintendent related to operational changes, or from the board related to policy changes, including any potential consolidation or closures of schools, we would expect that the line of communication would come directly from the source and either be in writing or in a meeting, a public meeting with stakeholders. So last night we just clarified the fact that while we are saying that no option is off the table, we are not actively considering school closures and consolidations because we're not at that point yet. So our effort is, first to try to get what we call low-hanging fruit, and then as we go further and further, it'll get more painful. But we certainly understand the concern that if we get to a certain point and we start to go to school closures and consolidations, what we were told last night, it's please don't do it. Don't do it at all. And if you're going to have to do it, don't do it the way FQ Sanchez was. And so, meaning, we want to be included in that discussion. We want to know what your plans are and so forth. So again, we just want to assure everybody that isn't an active discussion at this point. What we're looking for is to solve FY18, and then see what the legislature and governor what happens out of these conversations, sure, and then figure out where we're headed with the rest of these cuts.
So it seems like that's your last course of action.
Excuse me?
It appears that that's your last course of action then.
It would be our last resort. Okay. If it's a budgetary action. I did inform the community that we are looking at attendance areas. That's a totally separate process and would take a totally different track.
Okay, just one more question. This $18 million is going to come out of your operations, so but with the 2% increase, we are anticipating GDOE to get back $9.7 million, and that's specifically for CIP. So what was the decision behind DOE receiving 9.7 million for capital improvement projects when they were already giving up their pro rata of operations for 18 mil?
We took that directly from the speaker's suggestion at the SES when he asked, what about DOE and what about their facilities? So we just took that to provide the funding to take care of the deferred maintenance issues. If this body wants to be able to broaden that perspective and allow for them to have a more universal application of that funding, it was something that was discussed at SES, and we transferred the idea. I distinctly remember Christine Boleto, 1% for the deficit, 0.75 for GMH, 0.25 for DOEs for their capital needs. So that's where that came from. But that one, I would be in certainly have no objections if you broaden the application.
No, I think I should make a clarification. If both percent goes in, if the 2% goes through, they will get enough money for general operations to make the budget that we passed last August whole. So DOE will not have to cut its 12.
Okay, thank you.
If the additional 1% is given and the 0.25 is provided to DOE, DOE will be made whole in its operational budget, and it will also get $9.7 million for its maintenance of buildings.
Thank you, Mr.
So
Speaker.
it's two things.
Mr. Speaker,
That's not what it's showing on the attachment that was
showed
submitted.
us yesterday. Not at all. They presented
something completely
that
different.
even on top of a $15 million overall agency cut, DOE is going to be cut $18 million.
Yes. So that's why
That's
I'm
what
asking.
their
So their
attachment
operations
one
is still
shows.
cut 18 mil.
So
and
they're, I'm sorry.
Hey, Alpha, is it your turn or my turn? So is it that was the question, is we're cutting operations from DOE at 18 mil, and then on the back end, from that 1%, the additional 1% that a piece GDOE was supposed to receive, they're going to get 9.7 million specifically for facilities. And so I was wondering, we're hurting operations for facilities, and then there was the concern with some teachers and also some social workers I spoke with in DOE last night. And the concern was that some schools were closing down. So I was trying to make sense of one or the other.
I stand corrected. The administration is seeing it differently. My thought was that the 1% was going to stabilize the government in its current operation. It would make everything whole as the budget that we had passed. But if they're saying that if we pass the 2%, they're still going to have to suffer the 12%. I mean, the 12 million. I don't know where else that additional money is going to. I thought that the 1% for the general operation was to get us back up and fill in that $37 million shortfall for the entire budget.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, that's not the case then. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Carlson.
Vice Speaker?
Thank you. Yes, my questions are very similar and with the previous speakers. So can we just clarify this once and for all? This is, I guess, our concern with this bill. The bill is, premised on this, that we are going to raise BPT, gross receipts tax, by 2%. Yet, that doesn't solve any of the cuts that have been proposed by BBMR. That means $15 million across the board, all agencies, including Department of Public Health, including the Guam Fire Department, and actually all the departments. And that's $15 million. And even with this 2% increase in GRT, we are also looking at a $22 million cut, with 18 of it, the bulk being from DOE. So it's just very hard to, I guess, get any reassurance. I mean, what I was hoping to see, and I had asked for this at the SES and yesterday, because the circulars they're informative, but they're not mandatory, as the previous speakers said. You know, it's not included in the bill that these cuts are actually going to be made. It's not in an executive order that these agencies are going to be cut according to the BBMR circulars. The circulars had actually asked the agencies how, you know, this is what we're proposing, what are your suggestions, and how would you, and I'm looking forward to seeing the responses from the agencies in detail. Mr. Carlson, if that's what you're saying is available since last night, because yes, it looks like some of these agencies gave you some very detailed responses that I only saw DOE's yesterday in that hearing for the first time. We heard the fire departments and we heard the police response, and those are very informative for us. You know, we want to know if we give, you know, 9 million, if we pass a tax, if we pass a 2% increase in GRT and we close fire stations or we get rid of ambulances, I mean, we have to account for the people for that, right? If we close schools, I mean, I'm glad to hear that that's not on the table right now, so I'm very happy. And I know DOE is looking at 18 million. They've already figured out 12 million. I give them a lot of credit for that. But to find 6 million more, I agree. That's got to be tough after finding 12 million out of the Department of Education. So I guess, yeah, that's why this fiscal realignment plan is critical, because it puts in writing and it gives us some reassurance that what your priorities are going to be, and you know, going forward. And it just gives us the real plan. And I'm hoping that that is something that, because if you are in fact relying on your BBMR circulars, and that's a plan that you could put in writing to us very quickly, you know, that fiscal realignment plan, if that is how you intend to proceed, because that is something that perhaps, you know, we could finesse if we see fit, or you know, we're just going to have to trust you and go with it. But I guess what's giving me a little bit of doubt now is also when you said, if we can avert the, for example, you know, a safety crisis, or avert the closing of a fire station, or avert loss of an ambulance, how would you avert that? What is the flexibility that you have to avert that? That's I guess, I also am curious, where does that come from? Yeah, because if we have some kind of a capacity to avert, I'd like to avert those things now. So where do you anticipate this coming from? Thank you.
I don't anticipate anything occurring in the next 30 days, because we did approve of the fire department's overtime plan. So their overtime plan will allow for the authorization of the use of overtime, even though it's taxing. And I think Chief Nicholas did talk about how he has to have 2 vehicles with 2 people to meet the 4-person requirement on a response yesterday. So we will provide the flexibility in the overtime. And again, I apologize if you did receive the full details, but they were provided on the 13th, and I was under the assumption that it would be provided to you electronically for your review prior to anything, so that you'd have the background information.
Just for, please, colleagues, on the 13th, look in your emails. On the 13th, there was a dear colleague letter from me attaching 98 pages. Some people have not opened their email and questioned me about it. So I'm just saying, it was sent to you on the 13th.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
All right, well, yeah, I wasn't aware of that, Mr. Speaker, either, so thank you.
And can I just point out something? Maybe this will help to make the understanding of the situation where you're talking about how we still would have DOE potentially, you know, having to still cut with the 2%. Do you guys all have a copy of the OFB revenue enhancements dated February 13th? Because if you look at their projection for the 2% beginning in April, it's $49 million. And the revenue shortfall is 67. So, you know, we're only making up a portion of what it is that we need to make up. The cuts are inevitable, regardless. And that's how come we all discussed that it's a combination of cuts and new revenue that's going to see us through this fiscal year. So I would hope that you would take a good look at the $49 million, which I'm asking for your support in being able to push to the left the start date in March to try to raise that revenue level up to close the gap. So there will be a situation regardless of if we get our projected revenues replaced at the $67 million, if we say it's 67 short, but we're only supplanting that with a new revenue source of 49, there's going to be almost $20 million. And these cuts have to come. They have to come, and we'll all share in the pain. So that's where I think you're trying to balance something that really can't be balanced, because we're not asking you guys to pass a measure that's going to generate $70 million in this fiscal year. We're not doing that.
No, I understand. You're asking us to pass a measure that's only going to partially take care of the problem, and then to trust you to take care of the rest by cutting the government, and that's all we're asking, is that fiscal realignment plan is supposed to put in writing exactly how you intend to cut the rest of the government, and we'd just like to see that. I think that's reasonable. Those are my concerns, and that's what I had especially asked. And do you have anything from we received a letter from the chamber that says that the 2% increase in gross receipts tax is going to, I don't remember their words, but have a very negative impact on small businesses and consumers. They keep pointing out consumers, and I just want to know if you have any kind of analysis from your agencies or Department of Labor's economists regarding that?
No, ma'am, I don't. I just have the sample market basket that I provided, and I think it was
Yes,
the
I saw
second.
that. Thank you.
That's all I have.
All right. Anyone else? No?
I just wanted to comment on the small businesses because, I don't think as far as taxes for the small businesses, because they still have that that threshold that by law that if they made 50,000 or less on the previous years, they get to at least be exempted for the first 40. So I think it's lesser for the small businesses that are making that kind of money. So I think it's the bottom that are making more than the $50,000.
No further questions.
Any other senator? Senator Muñoz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do just have a simple question, but prior to yesterday, and even more so after yesterday, we were getting so many different suggestions on how we can fix this financial crisis, and I don't think that the community or the people really understand how dire this is. Because we're getting so many suggestions that take a process. So my question is for Mr. Arriola. I know you told Senator Lee that the priority is the bond payments, then payroll, then allotments, and then the vendor payments. So have we already started falling short on vendor payments? And then my next question would also be, when do you foresee payroll then start becoming effective?
Thank you, Senator. In terms of vendor payments, we basically didn't make any vendor payments for the first 3 weeks of February. So some of the property tax came in, so we're making vendor payments today as we speak. We basically we're the general fund, the government of Guam. We're a $700-800 million operation annually. We average about $5 million in our bank account, general fund bank account. That's dire. That's dire, folks. You typically have cash days. Private sector companies have, it's called cash days, amount of cash you have to run a certain amount of days in case there's in case there's an emergency. You have a certain amount of cash on hand for a certain number of days if there's an emergency. Typically, some businesses they run on they have cash on hand for at least 2 paydays, 2 or 3 paydays. We don't have that. We don't have that luxury. Most of you folks know me. I am not going to sit here, or I'm not going to go and work at DOA and try to finagle things. You know, I wake up sometimes at 3 o'clock in the morning hoping that Joe Mariano at the Bank of Guam doesn't call me and say, Vince, you're overdrawn. This is real, senators. This is real. You know, you want to talk about closing down fire stations in Umatic, Stumbo, or Talafofo. That could be real. If we don't close fire stations, we might close something else. We might close down Department of Agriculture. We might close down some other agencies. Vendors surely aren't going to get paid. But this is real, senators. And I'm sorry that it laid on us and it laid on you folks, the federal government's Tax Reform Act. Did we know this was going to happen? Sure, we knew this was going to happen. But did we know exactly how it was going to pan out? No. I read that there was either a tax commission or a SES meeting minutes in, I believe it was November. And I saw there was a quote there. They asked Mr. Joe Arnett. Everybody knows Joe Arnett. He's one of the -- tax guys. He quoted himself. We do not know the final impact of that Tax Reform Act until Congress passes it. And then we'll figure out how it's going to affect us. Well, guess what, folks? It happened. And this is where we find ourselves. This revenue loss is for real. You know, and we're doing our darndest. The way this government runs, we don't pay unless it clears BBMR. We all work together, BBMR, all ourselves. We know what the revenues are coming in. If they're not coming in, it's not going to clear him. If I don't have the cash, DOA doesn't pay for it. This is not our money. This is seriously, this is living paycheck to paycheck, except we're doing it in the hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions. And it's not our money. So we are in no position to abuse the public's trust, your trust, the trust of the governor, the trust of the people. We are in no position to do that. You know, and I could sense that. I've worked here. I grew up in a political family, so I know what this is like. I know what you guys are going through. I'm sorry, you folks, you senators. You know, this is a tough decision. But, you know, that's why the people elected you folks.
So yesterday we had a very good, strong, passionate group of people saying, don't touch my raises from the Competitive Wage Act. There was a strong group of people talking about that. And so I guess my point is that, okay, so maybe we won't go that route now, but across the board, now everybody is going to be affected, right? I mean, is that, and then how soon can we start seeing that everybody's paycheck is going to be affected and not just the people that got the Competitive Wage Act raise?
As I mentioned in one press conference, it could be as soon as next month, March. It could be a payless payday. It could be a 32-hour work week. It really, it's right around the corner. It's there. Could be there.
I think the community just needs to hear that because we need to do something now. And although all the great ideas are coming in, that all takes a process. And if it doesn't happen this way, then that's the way it's going to happen. That's the way I foresee it.
Were there any other senators? Speaker Cruz? Oh, sorry, Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and thank you very much to all of you for being here. Mr. Arreola, Vince, of course we know you, and I respect you a lot. I respect actually all of you here, you know, and I don't think there is, I don't think anyone in here feels that this is not real and we don't have to do something. We know we have to do something. And I believe I speak most for everyone here that we know we have to do something. It's just, how to do it, what options. what we have before us is just one option. And I know that the administration, OFB, has laid out all the different scenarios, all the different options. And that's where, at the end of the day, I believe we're going to go through this and find what's the best way. How can we how can it be something fair and equal to everybody, right? And I think, at least for myself, the way I see it, the increase in the BPT is, at this point, as how I see it, is really kind of uneven, right? Where it's going to affect, a portion of our community, where there is another portion, there's a smaller portion of our community who, at least what I feel, we should look at. I talked about the exemptions in certain industries. Those are areas that that we have as a government provided very generous exemptions. That this could be a time for us to really, look at that and see how this can fit in this process. So I'm sure, and rest assured that that's what this body is going to be doing. If we have to work long hours, or everyone is committed to doing that. I just want to assure you that, Mr. Ariola. So on the BPT, the 2% increase would net us about 49 million, right? That's the estimate, 49 million. From that 49 million, are you setting aside during the 2-year period? Is a portion of that going to GMH and DOE during this 2-year period? Because the way I read it here is that after the 2-year period, there is a portion that 0.75 that will remain, and that's where you split up the allocation for GMH and DOE. And correct me if I'm wrong.
You're correct. I think the thinking behind that is that during that interim, we will have come up with like the sales tax and effectuated that on internet sales. We may have revisited some of the other ideas like surcharges and maybe some additional fees for services. And I can't stress enough how I think fees for services are low-hanging fruit, because we do have a community that needs the services that different agencies provide. And there's a lot of fee structures there that have been, not adjusted for a long time. And I think that those things can collectively and, make up what it is that we have as far as a way to retire the BPT. But I would hope that we're not taking DOE for a 2-year ride and that's it. I would hope that the commitment to continue to fund them in this manner, or include them in the replacement revenue source, is something that this body is going to look at. So the way that this bill is constructed is to be ensure that the hospital's subsidy and dedicated funding source is retained after the sunset. I would really cannot emphasize enough how we're really willing to work to be able to get these new ideas finally in place.
So the 49 million that we would receive between now and the end of the fiscal year, how is that being allocated? Is that going to chip away at the 67 million shortfall? Or is that partially going to chip away at that, and partially is going to go to DOE and to GMH?
Well, the way that we have it laid out in attachment 1 is that there would be an allotment for an allocation for GMH and an allocation for DOE. We talked earlier about whether or not that should be for CIPs or just general operations. I defer to the body. But yes, the idea was to be able to, as discussed with Senator Lee, try to apportion the receipts consistent with how it's being done for the BPT bonds and the collection.
So, okay, because I know you did provide a lot, and there's a lot of documents, right, from the SES and from what you provided yesterday. So just on that, just to help me understand, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. So 49 million is what we estimate to receive on a 2% increase. How, if you can tell me from that amount, how is that being allocated?
One point of clarification. I took the liberty in attachment 1 of moving the collection date up. That's why you see 54 as opposed to the 49. So with that understanding, that's how the 54 came about. It's like an extra month.
So we have 54, that means minus the 67, that's the remaining we have to find. And DOE does not have to cut the 18, is it 18 million?
No.
So it's a mixture. That's what you're saying.
Like I mentioned when I was talking with the Vice Speaker and Senator Nelson, the amount of money that we're talking about for just one full year, if we don't move what I'm suggesting is the implementation date, but it's just easier math to use the $49 million number that's in the OFB handout and realize that we have a $67 million estimated shortfall in revenue. So there needs to be the cuts that they have to happen because there's not enough new cash to fully support everything that was appropriated back in 2018 for the 18
but
budget.
if we do, let's say we do pass this, right, and we collect 49 million because we do a 2%. Is there other areas, other options that that could be done as well to make up for that? What is it? 67 minus, 50? That's 16 million? 17 million?
Certainly. Again, we have the agency responses on what this body has approved, and we will embargo, put in reserve at BBMR funds that cannot be accessed so that, as Mr. Arriola pointed out, if we don't release the allotment, they can't proceed with any of the encumbrances because the allotment wasn't even provided.
So I guess for me, that's where I'm kind of going, is that we've seen DOE's their plan. They've come up with 12 million. Only one of them, as I understand it, affects the actual students or classroom, right? Which is the delay of pre-K. So, from that, and based on the other and the other plans that every other department has come up with, and if we use other options combined with the option of the increase in the BPT, wouldn't we now perhaps only need to perhaps raise it by 1% if we go down that path? And wouldn't that be something that's easier for the community to accept, because already the community doesn't accept it. Okay.
Sir, is this body willing to accept the consequences?
I think we have to face reality.
If the will of this body is to go halfway, even there were numerous discussions about service interruptions, classroom interruptions, all of these things. If you don't go with the 2%, there's going to be pain to share, and that pain is going to be exacerbated in fiscal 19. I was hoping that this exercise would be a prelude to the construct of 19, because we would have already replaced a good amount of the revenue, and then with some of these cuts, maybe we could use this as a template for a streamlined government, or make the case that no, Revenue still needs to have that additional personnel, which I think is universally accepted here. But Senator, I can't stress enough that we do need the full 2%, or else something's going to give, and what's going to give could be avoided. And government is service. We provide services to the people. Taxes are a way for people to pay for the services that the government provides to them. We went through this exercise with everybody, and I applaud your tenacity in the budget, hearings. You really took us all to task. You passed the budget for every agency that gave them just what they needed and not anymore. So how can we say that, we're going to have a shortfall? We were kind of like bare bone to begin with because you guys were pretty good about, keeping it that way. And then how do you expect us to continue? It's not going to work.
And I think, and just like I said when I first started my opening, is that we are in agreement that something has to be done. And you're saying nothing less than the 2%. And for me, I don't see it that way because there's other options. The amount, if you're saying 67 shortfall, we're in agreement. How we're going to make up for that, that's where I think we have some differences on that we're going to have to reconcile here because that 67 is not going to change. We know that.
Correct.
It's just a matter of how. So the 2% is not the only option. That's where I'm getting at. So the other question I had during the hearing was on the option of the surcharge, the 10% surcharge. Mm-hmm. On OFB's, the document they presented, it only estimated what it would look like in 2019. They didn't provide, is that correct?
Because the tax it's next year.
If you can tell me.
I guess if this body would exercise that particular law on the surcharge, it's really based on what's reported by the taxpayer. So that would be, it won't happen this year because people already filed their taxes for 2017. So we would have to wait until 2018 next year when people start filing their return. So the bottom line there, when you file your return, let's say a particular taxpayer or corporation, for example, reports total tax $10,000, then that's the surcharge that would apply to that. If whatever rate that this body chooses to apply, then that will be added to the tax.
So nothing could be used for us to collect in 2018?
No, sir.
Nothing. Okay. Okay, thank you. I probably have other questions after.
Are there any other questions?
Motion to rise.
Speaker Cruz?
Not of the panel. I have some amendments that I'll make without them here unless anybody else wants them here.
Are there any other questions of the panel? If not, Senator Espelno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a simple question. I already kind of have an idea where I want to go on this whole proposal. But that being said, from what I've been told or some information that was passed on to me, I understand that with the H-2B visa being lifted for the military realignment to proceed, there is, in fact, there's been a lot of shipments of rebars and cement and everything else coming through the port. I'm just wondering, is there a figure on the use tax that might be charged against these guys, and what are we collecting? And what do we anticipate to collect over the next several months? In other words, there's got to be, with all this movement now of equipment, of materials and whatnot, and there is a use tax that should be placed upon all this, what is the anticipated revenue from that is perhaps, I would imagine, not even included in this analysis?
I don't have that analysis right now, but I know for the last several years or year and a half, I think the industry and the construction industry basically has gone down because of the.
I understand, Mr. Camacho. My information is basically just recently, over the past several weeks or months, right? There's been a lot of movement. I'm not talking. I understand it has been on hold, but now, again, with all the movement that's happening, now we're seeing a lot of materials coming through the port. And that comes from people down at the port. So I just want to know, what is the expected revenue from the use tax of this rebar? And I'm talking a lot of rebar and a lot of cement, right? Is there a figure associated with all that coming in?
First thing, when people bring in materials for resale, normally the use tax won't apply. It will
Right.
be the
And
GRT.
this is, and
It will
my
be the
understanding
GRT.
is this is not for resale. This is being brought in by those who have been
Okay,
awarded the contracts.
and if it's brought in for construction for a contractor to build a house,
well, it's for the
basically-
military buildup.
military build-up. So normally those things will be paid when they're actually built. In other words, when they receive the money. In other words, it's a component of a building. So when you bring in something for a component of a building to build a $100 million commercial building or building, when they actually receive that funds, then that's when they pay the GRT. It's the ones that are brought in for use, for example, the tractors and
Well, and I understand there's a lot of big, heavy equipment that's coming in too.
that one, I can't quantify that right now. I need to work with the custom people. They're at first hand.
And I ask that because, again, I have not heard of any offsets. I mean, everything's been on the negative. We're going to lose this, we're going to be down this, and yet nobody's talking about what's going to be expected to come in now that we know that the buildup is moving forward. Now that we know that the laborers are going to be able to come in to start work. Now that we know that there's materials and heavy equipment, a lot of good heavy equipment, big heavy equipment coming in, right? And nobody's talking about that aspect in terms of, we talk about the losses that we're going to receive because of the consequences of the Federal Tax Reform Act, right? But nobody's talking about the income that's supposed to be flowing into our coffers because of this realignment, the military realignment. And that's what I guess is kind of one of the missing pieces of this whole thing. We're talking about the negatives without trying to offset about what are the positives to see if there's even a lower figure of what we should expect. I mean, instead of a 67 million loss, maybe from the Tax Reform Act that just passed, right, that might be offset by X amount of millions that are going to be coming in within the next several months or even by next year, let's say, right, which might not necessitate a 2-year increase, a sunset. It may be only a 1-year sunset and we haven't talked about that. I guess that's one of the problems I have, where everybody's talking about the negatives, nobody's talking about perhaps some of the positives that would offset some of the negatives.
Like I said, for purpose of the use tax, I can probably get with the people from customs. They're at first hand to find out those numbers. As far as the projections, I was trying to explain earlier that I believe the construction industries, there's a 15 to 20% loss on revenues to what you're basically saying, lack of the H-2B visa workers. Now that they're coming in, then I'm seeing there's going to be some increases, and that increases probably would have reflected maybe with the budget people, where when they project their budget for FY19, those are things, I think that should have been built into that.
Was it built in, Mr. Carlson?
There was a briefing today. I wasn't able to go. There was an update on the military construction projects at one of the hotels by the Guam Contractors Association hosted event. I don't understand.
Yeah, no, I know there's an interesting forum coming up. I think it's a week and a half from now, which I'll be attending.
If there is new construction, then we factor that in because you see what you have as far as the economy, and then you see
it would have been hard to factor in at the time that you're preparing the budget.
There wasn't anything to factor in 19.
Exactly, and
Correct.
that's the point I'm making right now, right? That has it been refactored? Has the budget that you are looking forward to in 2019, has it been kind of looked at again and saying, okay, wait a minute, things are happening. I mean, now that the visa waiver issue is no longer the issue in terms of the movement of the military buildup forward, has anybody said, wait a minute, by this time next year, we should be realizing X amount of income because of this?
You're right, Senator, and we will have those discussions in the summer when we start putting the budget together, because at the time that we submitted the budget, which wasn't even a month ago, it's a proposal for spending, and I have to make a correction. We did have option 1 and option 2 in the budget. Option 1 is if we got revenues back up to the 18 level, and option 2 is if we didn't. So we did submit a budget and it was reflective of reduced revenues if we did nothing to supplant those lost revenues. But you're absolutely correct, sir. In the coming months, as we get closer to being able to work with this legislature to come together to put the 19 budget together, we'll have better information on what the climate of the buildup is, how that's going to affect our revenues. But right now, right here and right now, we know we don't have anything.
Yeah, and I'm not disputing that. The issue to me, though, is within this bill, the sunset doesn't happen for 2 years. And the question in my mind is, if there are things going to be happening within the next year, maybe the 2-year period is too long, especially since the burden's going to be placed upon everybody to pay a higher tax.
But sir, I will remind you that the SES, BBMR, we didn't provide anybody with a 2019 effect. We only gave you guys something that pertains to this fiscal year and a portion thereof, and it's $67 million. So you can extrapolate that, sir, and you can say, okay, it's going to be at least that much, if not closer to 100. So we're only.
I understand, Mr. Carlson. What I'm saying is that in that equation, nobody's doing an offset of the potential income that should be coming in.
But we don't, sir. You said you heard there's a lot of, sir. I'm sorry. I don't
check
have
out your report. I mean, just say there's a lot of equipment coming in. There's a lot of rebar coming in. There's a lot of cement coming in.
I've heard that too, but I haven't seen it. So, and then what if it's going to sit?
Some people have.
Is it going to sit like the other stuff that came in the 90s?
There's a dollar figure associated with that. There's a dollar figure associated with that. And the point I'm trying to make, is that perhaps it shouldn't be, or it doesn't have to be, a full 2-point increase on the GRT, or maybe it shouldn't be a full 2-year sunset period, because there might be the potential to even come down off the 2 points to 1 point and maybe shorten the sunset period to 1 year, so that the suffering that we're all going to, the pain and the suffering that we're all going to have to feel, and all we're going to have to share it, because I'm not disputing the fact that the federal tax change, right, definitely is going to hurt us. But I'm just saying, how long do we have to go through the pain before we can start, again, getting back on our feet based upon our own economic strength, as opposed to just raising taxes? Okay. That's the point I'm trying to make. And if that assessment has not been done yet, then it's hard to go all the way with a full 2 points and a full 2 years. It's hard.
Yeah. I would submit, sir, that this fiscal year, the requirement for this fiscal year, I think we're pretty convinced about what the loss of revenue is and what the BPT for this year will do. And then I can only tell you that, and I agree with you 100%. I'm very optimistic that the H2 issue will create an economic activity that will benefit this community, and I'm hoping that will make up the difference in 19, so that we don't have to come back and ask you to raise it to 3%, another point to 3%, because we came to the realization that we're $115 million short in our collection in our revenue because of the full year tax impact. And it's just not going to be enough money, because the economic thing, it could go both ways, sir. So I would submit that we need the 2% for this fiscal year, and that it's a work in progress for 19.
Okay. Just to reiterate, to get it straight in my head, $67 million is the shortfall that we're anticipating, correct? $67 million. If we pass the 2%, then we're still going to be short $18 million. That's fair, right? Because you're saying it's going to be $49 million off the 2% for the rest of this fiscal year, and then we come back to $18 million, still $18 million short. That $18 million will then be made up by the cost containment that we have been presented. In terms of the $15 million, excuse me, Senator, I was wondering if Senator Will, I was wondering, I just don't have a direct line of sight. Yeah, it's hard to talk to the back of your head. But and so $67 million minus $49 million becomes there's $18 million left on the table that needs to be made up, and that will be made up by the cost containment of $15 million through the line agencies and some millions from DOE and whatnot, right? Although in the presentation that was made yesterday, between there'll be $15 million plus 20, let's call it $22 million, which includes DOE's efforts, right, to contain costs. So that's 37, right? So if you just take that 67 million figure and subtract the 37 figure, you come up with $30 million short. Correct? Simple math. It's correct. I'll answer that. It's correct. 67 million minus 37 million is $30 million short of what we need. And if 2% will get us 49 million, let's call it 50 million just to make it easier for math purposes. Let's call it $50 million, right, at 2%. That means 1% should get us $25 million, right? So if there's only $30 million that's outstanding or that we're going to be short after going through all these cuts, and we only raise it by 1% as opposed to 2%, right, then the only thing we need to make up is $5 million. And I'm sure we could find $5 million somewhere, considering we've spent more than $5 million on frivolous things. You know, but and I'm just thinking out loud on this one. In my mind, that's the math. Now, I'm sure all the various equations and algorithms and everything else and models and whatnot that you go through come out with different scenarios. But when you come down to the brass tacks of it, in pure simplicity of what everybody out here in the community thinks, and that's the way I think, that in the end, after all the efforts of this government to try to pare down its costs, which would equal about $37 million, all we need is $30 million. And if 1% point increase of GRT or BPT equals $25 million, then all we're really looking for, past that 1% increase, is $5 million. And I guess that's what I have a hard time swallowing with going the full 2% over a 2-year period without even including the prospects of what kind of revenue we're going to be seeing because of the military realignment that is starting to happen now. And I'm not sure the fire, and I understand the urgency of making sure we have cash in bank, we have bills to pay, we have personnel, payroll to make, we have obligations out there. But it can't be so extreme that the pain is more than really we need to bear. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Uggan, and then Senator Castro.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm still waiting for that figure that will be reimbursed from the Territorial Education Facilities Fund to the General Fund. And it's been an hour and a half, and I would think that any time that our government is remitting that kind of payment, we should know the figure outright. So do we have that information?
The one thing I can tell you, sir, is that the general government pays for the T's and lease January 1st before any TEFF money is realized. So that $10.1 million is a component of what it is that would be reimbursed technically to the general fund because it was fronted to the TEFF.
Understood. So that's
one of
T's
them.
and lease.
That's the only one that I can tell you.
The other question I asked was the bond payment, the advance payment of the education bond.
What education bond, sir?
Isn't there an advance, outstanding education bond in which TEFF funds are being utilized? Or has that already been transferred?
It was refinanced, and I think that was in 1990 something, the one that built UOG. So the only outstanding component is UOG's contribution.
Okay, so you're looking at $10.1 million, and that should be reimbursed traditionally by the end of February?
Depending on collections, it's just the first installment.
No, but this is a property tax.
Correct.
So, I mean, property tax has not fluctuated as a result of the federal tax reform.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is the property tax amount, I think adopted this year was like 28 million, but I don't know what the first installment amount is because there's two installments. So we wouldn't be getting $28 million this month because it's broken up into two installments.
Understood. So you're looking at a reimbursement of $10.1 million. And let me just close with this statement. And Mr. Arriola, I understand your plea when you said that this is real, folks. We have an average of $5 million in the bank account, and you have to meet obligations, you have to meet payroll, and you have to cut costs. But this is also real when we're asking our people to give up, based on the 2 percentage point, a 50% increase in the business privilege tax, in which it's going to reach all of our consumers out there. And there's a statement by one of the individuals that provided a testimony, and I was going to read it a little earlier, which says, Madam Chair, if you can indulge me, this gentleman, Mr. Farron, states that I am not in favor of either bills because I disagree with any increases to the, he puts down BRT, Business Review Tax, which is the business privilege tax. First of all, let's call it what it really is. It is not a 2% increase, it is a 50% increase. And only 1% increase is actually a 25% increase to BRT. Because if you take 4% and increase it by 2%, what is that? This is actually a 50% increase. And it says the legislature increased the BRT in 2004 to 6%, and what I noticed was a case of chicken used to cost $8 for a 22.5 pound. When the increase was implemented, the case of chicken went up to approximately $13. And there is, if you took 50% of $8, which equates to $4, you see where the difference in price is. And I'll continue on, I'll close out with, and that's what we need to understand here by raising the BRT. And not just to include, after the legislature rolls back the BRT to 4%, the case of chicken never went back to $8. And that's an example from one of the individuals that provided a testimony. But it really comes down to our consumers, our people out there who are living paycheck to paycheck, and our small businesses who are barely making it. And we are asking them for a 50% increase in the business privilege tax. More has to be done by their government. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Senator Castro. All right, Senator Sir Nicholas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions to find out the full scope of what it is that we're dealing with here, because I think that the conversation has been centered around trying to make sure that we're getting in the revenues that we need to make up for the shortfall from the Trump tax cuts. And so we're looking at trying to bring in revenue to continue our general operating expenses, to be able to meet our general operating expenses. But I wanted to also kind of get an idea of what's out there that isn't part of that general operating expense category that we're trying to supplement. And so I wanted to ask the director of the Department of Administration, what is the current balance on our payables that we are currently owing to our vendors?
Senator, it's around about 41 million.
40 million?
41.
$41 million.
Yes, sir.
So we owe vendors 41 million on top of this $67 million shortfall. Does that include also, because I was of the understanding that some of our insurance contracts were not up to date, we're still behind in paying our insurance vendors, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
That 41 million includes the insurance?
Yes, Senator.
Okay, so we have $41 million more that we need to pay. What about, I always like to, when we talk about the budget, we talk about kind of like, where we appropriate the revenues that our government brings in. And I know that oftentimes we talk about compact impact and how we don't get enough of a reimbursement. But the reality is that compact impact money isn't even included in our appropriations. That's actually money that's outside of the budget. Can anybody tell me where our compact impact money is? I know it should be about $13 million. Can anyone tell me where that $13 million is and where it's been spent, if it has been spent, and if it hasn't, are we factoring that as an available resource to make up for this shortfall?
I'm sorry, Senator, the compact impact, the one that came in September, or?
Yeah, the compact impact funds that we receive from the feds, because I know we don't budget for it, it's not included in our budget. So where is the money, and where was it, if it's been spent already?
That went into general fund.
So it went into the general fund, but it's not an appropriation category. So
all funds that are received go into the general fund.
So looking at the CRER, under federal sources, I don't see a section for compact impact money.
You have that, John? Yeah. Let me ask Lynn.
There's a question regarding
the compact impact money.
Yeah, compact impact is discretionary funding of the governor.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is because at this juncture, I don't think there's anything that's discretionary. So where is the compact impact money? Do we have any compact impact money? And if we don't, and it was spent, where was it spent, so that we can have an idea of what choices were made with that $13 million now that we're kind of at this point in time?
As you guys all remember, we get about $14 million a year. $6 million of that goes to pay for the leased schools. And then the remainder is provided to the governor for him to use for a variety of different projects and expenses. He has full discretion over the use of that money. You're wondering, what did he spend it on?
Do we have any of it? And if we don't, what did we spend the $8 million on?
The funds are earmarked for special projects that we're looking at. We have a MOU at the Attorney General's office right now to supplement the Department of Public Works in their ability to get asphalt. So that's about a $2.5 million encumbrance of those funds so that we can pave more roads and utilize the services of the Department of Public Works and their very good efforts in taking care of the village streets. So there is a few other things that we're looking at being able to do, and they're tied up in work requests that we've submitted or in the process of preparing for various uses to include public service vehicle purchases and some other items that are holistic in nature. We provided some compact impact money from the Department of Interior to the Department of Education over the summer. We gave them $1.5 million. We also are committing to give the Department of Education another $1.5 million. We've had discussions about taking care of playground equipment, and that's been noted to be in disrepair and potentially harmful to our children. So the encumbrances of those funds to be able to address items that the governor believes are of primary concern and benefit the entirety of the islands where that money goes.
Thank you. I would like to implore, because we're sitting down having this conversation and we keep talking about how we all got to everyone says come together, come together. I think this $8 million has to be part of the conversation of coming together. I think that we need to factor that into the equation so that, as Senator Espadon was mentioning, if we're going to be talking about tax increases, which is something that I'm very uncomfortable discussing, we need to get the figure as correct as possible so that the impact can be as contained as possible. And if that includes adding an $8 million resource onto the table, I think that that's a conversation worth having. I also wanted to bring up another law that we were able to get passed recently, which is Public Law 34-25. And this was an act to add a new Section 22437 to Article 4, Chapter 22, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to requiring that executive branch agencies of the Government of Guam amortize payments of municipal leases into equal monthly installments throughout the fiscal year, except when such amortization schedule would cause a violation of an indenture such that it would negatively impact the credit rating of the Government of Guam. I just recently heard that we just a chunk of $10 million in January for one of these municipal leases. This law was in place since July of last year. Did the administration explore whether these municipal leases could amortize over a 12-month period as opposed to chunking out like $10 million all in one shot like the law was intended? Because these are examples of how we can really smooth our cash flow to mitigate these adverse impacts. And if at all possible, and this is also just for the record for the budget chair, the way a municipal lease works with respect to how its mechanics operate is that the reason why it doesn't count towards our debt ceiling is because technically it isn't a fixed obligation of the government, in that if at any time we choose not to appropriate for those municipal leases, then those municipal leases are deemed unfunded. and we could choose not to appropriate for those municipal leases.
You could.
And I know DOE's here. I love the department, but if we're talking about an $18 million cut, if we could instead cancel the municipal lease for the admin building and pump that $8 million back in, or use that to help balance this out, I think that's also another example of how we can really come to the table here. So there's just all these different, and this is why I'm of the mind that it's very important that as also part of coming to the table, we have this fiscal realignment plan so that we can see what the first bite of the apple is looking like, and then we can have conversations about these other potential opportunities, like reducing those bites by $8 million with a coming to the table with compact impact money, and reducing that bite by another $8 million by coming to the table with the municipal leases being reconsidered. And that's $16 million right there. And based on the calculations that I saw in our hearing last evening, when you actually strip out the proposed $15 million and $9 million for DOE, you're only talking about a $29 million amount that needed to be subsidized with the GRT increase. But if we already, in just this conversation alone, are able to find $16 million to less out from that, that takes us down to just a $13 million. And so all of a sudden, 1% can go down to 0.5%. And perhaps even, as some of my colleagues have mentioned in the media and in some of their discussions, maybe even not a GRT increase at all, but maybe a reconsideration of different taxes that are available, or perhaps even just looking at where we can find additional places to cut. I think that if we are going to be bringing all these things together, it's going to really help us to come up with something that would mitigate the pain as much as possible for our people. And I think that's what everybody in here is trying to do. We're trying to not hurt GovGuam workers. We're also trying to not hurt consumers. We're trying to not hurt businesses. And we're trying to not dump that burden onto our taxpayers. But it's going to require us to really, and I don't like to say cut the fat, because I feel like a lot of these things are parts of how our government operates, but we just really need to look at those parts all over again and find out if maybe we can make do without some of those parts, at least for a time until we're able to right-size everything. So, Madam Chair, I just kind of wanted to have this conversation to highlight that I don't think it's wise to put the cart before the horse and jack up taxes before we've sharpened our pencils and really came to a hard, where the metal meets the road number that we're all going to really come to the table on and equally make adjustments with, so that our people can have the confidence in knowing that we didn't just try to, get this thing through and move on and put it behind us, but we really made as genuine an effort as possible to tackle this challenge before us. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to point out, Senator San Nicolas, that the lease was paid for this current fiscal year, so that money is already gone, so it's not anything that you can reduce the current obligation by. And the annual payment was used to securitize a loan that the developer used to build the facilities. So the timing of the payment is consistent with his obligation to his creditors to make the payment. But you are also correct that if this body decides that we want to save $10 million or some part of it, we would have to renegotiate the agreement, just as Mr. Fernandez is talking about doing, and maybe leasing out the central office to be able to try to mitigate some of their costs. So you mentioned $16 million. I would submit that 10 of that is unavailable currently. And then I did point out from the 8 million that we already have, and I don't have the complete list, but off the top of my head, it comes out to 5.5 million of the 8 that's already obligated for something, and I explained what that was. 3 of that to DOE and 2.5 to Department of Public Works. I just don't remember what the other encumbrance was. So if the body decides in 19 that you don't want teach in high school, and you don't put it in the budget, and you prepare accordingly the Department of Education to absorb, you're correct that the lease could be terminated with the proper notification, and that $10 million obligation would not be there anymore. But that's a decision that this body makes coming up in 19.
And just to clarify, I'm not saying close teaching high school. There are other municipal leases that don't directly affect our school children. So, Mr. Carlson, and that's why this is a very skeptical process for me, because if we're genuinely going to be coming to the table, we can't be throwing things like that out there as if it's going to be an all or nothing proposition. That closes ears, and that shuts mouths, and that makes us not cooperate with each other. So I would advise that we don't do those things anymore. We're way too far into this problem for us to be drawing lines in the sand and having these all or nothing propositions.
But you did say $16 million is potentially on the table, and I'm just trying to make sure that everybody understands that $10 million isn't. It was already paid. It's like COLA. It's gone.
No, I
for
understand
this year.
that. But at the same time, too, when you're talking about the GRT increase, it's not just for this fiscal year. It's also for the next one.
That's correct.
And if we can find savings for the next fiscal year and factor all of that into how we're going to calculate this BPT increase, as my colleague to my opposite extreme mentioned, perhaps we can sunset things earlier, or perhaps we can reduce the amounts. And that's the whole nature of the conversation that I'm trying to have here. Okay. And I'd like for us to try and keep it as constructive as possible. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Speaker Cruz on that point, and then Senator Esteves.
I just wanted to follow up on that. I just wanted my colleagues to understand that for the past 3 years, I have written to the governor directly and suggested to him that he renegotiate that TDSIN lease. And I wrote to him over 3 years. I can find all the legislation for all of you who want to see it. DOE wasn't able to move into its edifice until just a couple of months ago because of the water problem. And I kept saying, if they have defaulted on the agreement to build your offices and your warehouses, renegotiate it. I've been asking 3 years. And so to say now, yeah, you can do something, we've asked. I just want my colleagues to understand, we have been asking.
Senator Esteves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been listening a lot, and if my colleagues will indulge me, I'm just going to roll what was going to be my speaking out during session with some of my comments based on some of the things I heard. I think most of you up there know me to be a fair individual and look at things as objective as possible. Though I do have to note some things. There are concerns. And I think going through committee of the whole, we're starting to see that there are other options, and maybe cooler heads will prevail, and we need to just continuously work together, and this shouldn't be the single solution to solve the problem, because it's not. And then I'm just thinking back to the history and what we need to do to move forward. Obviously, the hospital, needs funding, but I'm conflicted, because on some end, there are some things that could have been approved upon. Miss Manglotnia, you remember, for about a month, I worked with GMH on the GPO model for vendor processing, and I asked for follow-ups. I left it in the executive hands to do their job, to save potentially millions of dollars and provide supplies on hand in a warehouse for GMH and public health. Nothing. Heard nothing back. And so it becomes difficult to move forward and say, at this point, an emergency juncture, we need to move forward. But at the same time, I do understand, Dr. Duenas, there's still a need to save patients' life. So I bring these points up so that the people can understand. We all know I'm running again, but so the people can understand the conflict that I go through. But when you become a politician or a senator, to most people, you're not a person anymore. You're either their best friend or you're a monster. Not really a way to play the middle. And then, moving towards, and I'll let you respond to that in a second as I talk through. And then, good Lord, that's a lot of information here. So, I just want to clear up about a couple things. My colleague brought up a point about discretionary spending with the compact impact. And while I was aware of that, we understand some was spent, but we all knew this was coming. And it feels, and I'm going to get nasty grams about this, I'm sure, in my phone in a bit, but it feels a bit disingenuous, and this is just speaking truthfully, that, and I'll use an analogy. You have 3 kids at Papanizuk in Molesto talking about putting their money together to buy something, and one of the kids is holding out. That's what it feels like. And I understand that the governor has full discretion, and I respect that, and I make no motion to change that. All I ask is, in the spirit of what we're all going through as one government and 3 branches, that we really come together moving forward, especially in next fiscal year. I did put together a couple of numbers. I've been consistent about performance-based budgeting, and again, one of the issues I'm tying into is there was a law passed for standard operating procedures, so we can start developing performance-based metrics. So in this time of situation, we know where we can cut in more detail to make it easier on everyone. It was a check and balance system, a trust but verify. And now I'm here. I hear that we're making all the cuts we have, but I can't verify. I can't verify at all. And so it becomes very, very difficult to help. And me being an objective guy, it goes from being numbers to being about emotion, and I don't like that. Not how I want to run government. And I don't mean this as a lecture. Again, at the end of the day, what matters is the vote, right? So I just want you to understand my train of thought listening here today. But a couple statistics, and this is not just for you. We're all aware of this, but I think for the public watching right now, because there was some testimony provided at the public hearing. Guam was being compared to a city in California, Oceanside. And again, for those that didn't listen, population of Oceanside, California, 175,464. Guam's population, 162,896. The tax rate in Oceanside, California is 7.75%. The tax rate on Guam is 4%. The land tax in Oceanside, California is 1.179%. The land tax on Guam is 0.29%. The average per capita earnings in Oceanside, California is $28,452, and on Guam, it's $35,461. And I only bring this up because I'm trying to be objective when I hear we need to increase the GRT, but I have to ask myself, as my responsibility to the people, is can we afford it? Can the people afford it? And I'm trying to rationalize this with numbers, not about what we necessarily need. Can we actually afford it? Can the people actually afford it? That does, I think that's an important thing to understand and how we can compromise to move forward. A couple big differences, though, if you were to compare us to Oceanside, which has higher taxes in general, and you can't say cost of living on Guam is higher, because anyone who's been to California knows the cost of living is tremendous. But if we wanted to take the Oceanside model, we need to just get rid of the judiciary. They don't have that. Get rid of DOC. So whoever we do catch, we just release them because there's nowhere to put them. We get rid of GMH because there's no public hospital in Oceanside, California. There's a private hospital close by that doesn't take everybody unless you have insurance. Stop funding UOG because there's only a community college in Oceanside, California. Get rid of GVB. They don't have a visitors bureau. BSP, BBMR, Chamorro Affairs. And I say this not, I think for the public to understand the very real situation we're here. And what you were saying, and Mr. Carlson, to your point, what are we willing to cut? And how far are we willing to cut? And that's where we really need more of the public input, because they say cut all day. And I think some of my colleagues have alluded to it. I don't see that much fat. Is there fat? Oh, definitely. And I'll get into that in a sec. But is there enough to cover it? I think we just don't know. So, I mean, to the benefit of the wonderful folks at Government of Guam, and to you wonderful folks, I mean, I get it. We have a lot of responsibilities. And I just want to reiterate that for the people of Guam to understand that you can't just cookie cut a situation with the city and put the name Guam there, because that's not what it works. We have responsibilities. We have a lot more responsibilities. Now, talking about specifically to the GRT, you know, I had asked this question before. I never received an answer, but I did get it. And I just want to draw a comparison, not for the public, but mainly for the public watching. And because part of my question is, can small businesses afford the 2% GRT increase? I notice I haven't made a position yet because I'm weighing all of the options. In the old tax plan, a company A that grossed $250,000 would be taxed at 39% corporate. They can deduct the full state taxes, in our case would be GRT, which would be $10,000. $10,000 would be the GRT that they pay for at 4% on $250,000. And at 0.39%, at 39%, they would be paying $93,600 in corporate withholdings, plus the $10,000 in GRT to help fund the government. Under the new plan, the same company grossing, this is all gross, grossing $250,000 is now paying at a tax rate of 21%. Now, the reason I break this down is so that everybody understands what exactly is being lost here. Corporate income tax at a net of $240,000 per year, with the gross of $250,000, because $250,000 is the threshold. Because I've read the tax Trump plan. Besides the loopholes under the new tax Trump, you can only deduct up to $10,000 in state local taxes. So the threshold is now $250,000 at $10,000 to break the threshold. Under that, they are taxed at 21% corporate, which only brings in $50,000, $50,400, and the GRT remains the same at $10,000. No change at 4%. That's a $43,200 difference for one company. If they were to double, or if they were to double their business, not double, I'm sorry, if they were to increase their business 100-fold and now gross $500,000 a year, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, corporate income tax is $187,200. GRT at the current rate will only be $20,000. That's how significant the reduction in the tax rate for corporates are. I'm sorry, that's on the old plan. Corporate taxes, income tax at $187,200. Under the new one at 21%, they're only paying corporate income of $102,000, and GRT remains the same at $20,000. Whereas they were able to remove $500,000. There's not many businesses that make that much, but that's a significant savings. So can small businesses afford it? I mean, I'm of the mindset that the market will adjust itself, and that's enough wiggle room. The difference between both is almost double, $84,300 on the gross, because of that percentage difference from 39% to 21%. Almost overnight. Did we know about it? Yeah, absolutely. But I'll tell you what, I mean, I'm just looking at summaries, and I've been keeping it up. There's still other states that are panicking just like we are. So for everyone out there that thinks we're just the worst government in the world, I'll tell you what, we're not the only ones trying to figure this out. I have been talking with tax consultants, Madam Chair, in the states, and what some states are doing is they're just reverting back to the old tax plan for their state, but we don't have that luxury. We don't have the luxury to revert unless we delink. And so again, I bring up these points only for the mere fact that not just to kind of talk through what I've been hearing today, but so that the public understands the type of deliberation we're all going through right now. With that, again, I believe at this time we can support a 2% increase with the sunshine provision. And maybe I'll be the bad guy of it, so be it, but I'm just looking at the numbers. If Oceanside, California, with very little to no services, can enjoy a 7.75, I think we can go up to 6% for a short period of time, so that we're not doing a shock to the economy. So at this time I do support the 2% increase. I'm sorry if I hit a couple points. Again, it's a very difficult job everybody is in. All I ask is that we keep moving forward. All I ask from Adelut and the administration is that we get the fiscal realignment, because I can't do my job until the fiscal realignment and the new budget comes before us, so that we can start looking at more cuts. Because I don't mind being the bad guy to cut out all the NGOs from the budget. If you're looking for that guy, I'll be that guy and make that proposal on the floor. But we need that new budget proposal to come down so we can do our job and try to find more cuts and potentially reshift resources to GMH, which I would love to do. So thank you for indulging me, my colleagues, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panel.
Senator Castro. Is there a question? All right.
Yes, he wanted me to respond, and yes, and we did meet on the cooperative purchasing agreement and trying to get the group to buy in to assisting GMH, but we have been working on that, but our biggest challenge is we have terrible credit, and we have very low cash flow. And to Senator Morrison's comment about, are we going to have Payless Payday? We face that every single pay period. Every payday, it's like minute by minute on whether we're going to have enough funds to cover the EFT. And then hopefully by the following week, we'll have enough to cover the paper checks. That's been going on at GMH all the time. And, when Vince said he has $5 million in the account, I wish I have that. Because sometimes, you open the cash management and it's in the red. And just last weekend, I received multiple phone calls from the bank to cover the payroll account because it's in the red. Saturday morning, I got a phone call. There's a person that's trying to cash their $2,000 check. And I was being demanded to transfer the money because they're not going to cash that check. So I had to call somebody in. I said, please transfer the money to the payroll account because there's someone trying to cash a $2,000 check. That's what we have to face. That's a reality of the hospital. So, if you don't agree with raising BPT by 2%, so 1.75 will go to the hospital, then that's your, what they call it, legislative temperament the judicial temperament.
Thank you. I understand. I understand the position.
But there have been many studies, many reports, many CEOs, many CFOs, revolving door of leadership at the hospital. But it all points to funding.
All right. Thank you very much.
Well, let me just respond to that. Thank you again. And I just want to go back to one point, because I've said this from the beginning. Because when I got my butt kicked and lost political capital, and again, I'm not running again, but I said one thing, is when everyone was trying to take the pay of the administrators, I said pay them what they're worth and hold them accountable. And so if anyone is angry at me for saying what's on my mind, just remember that at the end of the day, I was there. And all I'm asking now is that the accountability is there. And to my point is, yes, there have been studies and there are issues at GMH, but back to the point about the GPO, I've yet to see a business plan that says if we invest X money in this specific item in a warehouse with this, we will make or save X amount. And what I'm trying to say is...
Let me say something about the warehouse. We invited Region 9. when Region 9 was here, we asked them, because there has been discussion going on with Perry Point. This is the federal, this is the federal government where we buy medications and it's the cheapest. And we have asked them to come here so they will put up their own resources to open a warehouse. So GMH doesn't have to pay for a warehouse. We get notices for eviction for even with our own warehouse that we're renting for the medical records. We're trying to scan that and, digitize it so we don't have to pay any more warehouse fees. I mean, lease payment for that. I mean, that's the reality and that's the challenge that we face day in and day out at GMH. And I welcome you to come and sit there and see how it is to run that hospital without money.
Senator Steves, do you have more to?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, Senator Castro. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a single question. Listen, I may not be an economist, certainly not an accountant, definitely not well learned on the intricacies of bond financing. But with all due respect to my colleagues, I too have been listening and pretty intently. And the one thing that I've heard each day and time again, recurring as recent as the last speaker, is that the government of Guam will not have enough cash to sustain its operations. And I don't want to get into this debate about whose fault it is or to whom this burden belongs. Rather, I want to build upon the things that a few of our colleagues have mentioned that can move us forward. Because I agree, no one wants to face the threat of a furlough or a reduced work week or the outright threat of being fired. Certainly don't want to see agencies disappear or consolidated unnecessarily. I heard a reference to the Department of Agriculture as if it was any less important to another agency. And certainly conservationists or biologists or other key personnel there have a critical role in sustaining our government and this community, especially when it comes, in that instance, the environment or protecting our ecosystems. So I have one question. I agree with the previous speaker. I too want to build upon what's been mentioned, to be constructive. The one thing I did take away from the previous speaker to my right was his use of the word compromise. And so that leads me to my question, Madam Chair. Is the administration willing to compromise? Now, I was in communication with the governor earlier this afternoon, and he's willing to entertain any other solution other than Bill 245 that could be put on the table, and quickly. Because what we do not have at this point in time is the luxury of time. The representative from the administration mentioned within weeks, not months, the threat of some serious critical decisions that will threaten the GovGuam workforce will be made real. And again, I want to ask, is the administration willing to compromise? Are you willing to take a position to reduce the operations of the government by $30 million within perhaps a negotiated sunset provision at a year as opposed to 2? Would you be willing to take it upon yourself to establish a fiscal realignment reorganization committee made up of members of this body in cooperation with the administration so we can prioritize which programs, what positions, and which agencies to address and when, and in what fashion, in an open and transparent manner? Will you be willing to entertain some of the exemptions that our colleagues put forward that may have cost them political capital, such as exemptions outlined in Bill 230? Will you also be willing to identify other revenue-generating opportunities, such as surcharges, the use of electronic commerce to generate revenue for the sale of digital assets? Will you be willing to compromise on a sunset provision of 1 year and convert whatever it is we raise to this 2% BPT to a sales tax at the end of that year? Of course, all with a caveat that we keep the 2% and it's effective March 1st. That's my only question, Madam Chair. Thank you. That's directed to the head of the panel.
Mr. Carlson? Mr. Carlson.
There were like 5 different items there. But I get the gist of it, and I think if you could help me, you're saying the 2% March start date sunset 1 year with a lot of work collaboratively to be done to address where we need to be, how we might restructure, what exemptions we might want to entertain, some of the other things like surcharges, even something from the DPW director yesterday about putting out an RFP for that prime property in Upper Tumon for somebody just to build him a more adequate and state-of-the-art facility somewhere else, and that property could be developed. I mentioned fee structures that we might want to revisit to supplant and wean off the general fund. All of those things we can commit to doing with you guys to be able to get us where we need to go, including the suggestion from Senator Espaldon about how we might really want to be more informed with the military on just exactly how this buildup is going to start working. I know that $45 million project for Route 3 is signed, so I know we can count on that. But there's a lot more that I think would contribute to the BPT that we could all collectively figure out and how to get where we need to be based upon, again, going back to what Senator San Nicolas said, with everything being on the table. We can commit to doing all the work. The last part was 1 year, right? Yeah. Do it. Do it. Okay, 1 year. We'll do it.
All right. Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have a question for Reverend Tax, but Madam Chair, if I can just get a clarification for the record. The previous speaker on this side of the aisle mentioned about downsizing agriculture. I just want to understand exactly who made that particular statement.
Previous speaker? That was Will.
I'll wait until he returns to the hallway.
Senator Castro?
Because Senator
Your
Castro?
reference to the Department of Agriculture, he's asking who made that statement?
Because I didn't recall anyone making that particular statement.
Was it you, Vince? Thank you. I appreciate it because I wasn't about to go through the last 90 minutes. I don't recall specifically, Senator, but thank you, Vince, for stepping up and saving me the research.
No.
By the way, it was a bad example.
I think the good senator was mentioning some about some of my comments. If we had to
Okay, then enough said. Enough
Yeah.
said. It did not originate from this side of the aisle because obviously I would be concerned about that. I have a quick question to Reverend Tax because Naval Facilities just today made an announcement about individual RFPs that will be going out in the second quarter of fiscal year 2018, third quarter of fiscal year 2018, IDIQ at $98 million for the second quarter, a MAC contract in the amount of $990 million, third quarter of this fiscal year, another IDIQ, $90 million for fiscal year 18, third quarter, a MAC project in the amount of $75 million, fourth quarter of fiscal year 18, and then finally a MAC project of $240 million for fiscal year 18, third quarter to be awarded. My question is, that's approximately $1.5 billion just within this quarter alone that would be RFP'd out. My question is Reverend Tax capturing all of our GRTs or business privilege taxes as it relates directly to these military contracts?
I believe every business out there should be filing and paying gross receipts unless otherwise it's exempted by law. We do, when the public auditor did an audit on the GRT, we do look into a lot of these things, and we do a lot basically in cross-checking and all these things, whether it's projects that you mentioned, like there, or even other projects that are out there, to make sure that these are basically, well, we don't do it 100%, but we do go over those numbers to see if they're there. And we sometimes cross-check with other contracts, basically, if these people are returning or are reporting and paying GRT.
So are you capturing all the business privilege taxes that should be due by these businesses?
Like I said earlier, every business out there that are performing businesses, whether it's contract or what you're talking about, the contract that were RFPing out, basically from time to time we do have projects, compliance projects that we look into and basically see whether these people are paying or not.
So are some of these anticipated? Because I know it was mentioned during the very beginning of this conversation that some activities have been discussed with regards to the military buildup. And I believe, Mr. Carlson, you mentioned this, the coordination between the governor's office as well as the military buildup office. Now, in this particular case, my question is, have these anticipated RFPs or contracts been factored in as part of the anticipated revenue just for fiscal year 18? I'm seeing Mr. Carlson shake his head in a negative way, so the answer is no. So, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the responses.
Speaker Cruz.
Just to follow up on that question as it relates to the huge military contracts, not that I'm sympathetic to them, but I really do think that we have to stop and think about the impact. The $98 million contract that he talks about would have under the current 4%, would pay a gross receipts tax of about 3.9. If we increase it by 1%, it would be about, unless my math is really wrong, 98? Yeah. 980. It's huge. And the reason why I'm raising that question is because all of the RFPs that went out and all of their responses that went in hopefully took into account the BPT that they were going to be paying. And I know because I was stopped at a funeral just last week where an architect said, please give us some lead time because we're going to have to rewrite all of our responses to bids to take into account this increase BPT. And it is it's in numbers that I don't even know how to read because it's got more zeros than I'm used to.
If I may comment on those contracts, basically, first thing is that we won't realize everything in 1 year. We are looking maybe 3 to 5 years on those big contracts. Secondly, if I recall, when we did the increase from 4% to 6%, that was back in 2004, I believe. I think there was a provision there to actually address those issues, Mr. Speaker.
Is that in this bill?
I'm not sure.
Who? Your fiscal team wrote 245. Is it in this bill? It's not in this bill. So that's what the press release was that just came out this evening from the business community. Is these are going to adversely affect the military contracts that we're all, the golden goose that we're all depending on to drive everything else up, is that the 1% of every million every $100 million contract, that's huge. That's why the question that was posed earlier by the senator from from Tamuning, we've got to understand that the impact of the 2%. For some of the small ones, it might be interesting. You know, I'm not going to even say that relative. I'm just saying this is big, especially when people haven't had a chance to factor it into the contracts the contracts that they're signing.
Senator Torres.
Is that the rationale then for under insurers, page 6, line 25, why the percentage for gross income received as a premium for writing of insurance was not raised from 4 to 6%, but the percentage on any other gross income earned or derived on Guam was adjusted upward? I was curious about that, and I thought that, I presumed that it had something to do with contractual obligations or so with regard to insurers. But on the retiring speaker's vein, is that a similar justification for not adjusting that number upwards and keeping it at 4%? It's on page 6.
Yeah, but on page 7, it carries forward, and it's reflected, the increase on page 7.
Right, but you would expect that if there's that there would be a corresponding, because it maintains at 4% for gross income received as a premium for the writing of insurance, less return premiums and less all commissions attributable to the sale and purchase of the policies. But there is an upward adjustment further on. It would seem that there should be a correlation, but perhaps I'm not understanding it.
Any other gross income as opposed to insurance.
Yeah. I think the question is, was that a typo or was that purposeful?
It could have been missed. It could have been missed. It could have been a typo.
Page 6, line 27.
Yeah, because it's carried forward on the same subject of insurers on the next page, and the adjustment is made there. And every other section, it may just have been missed.
Right.
I don't know. I don't remember in any discussion that this was intentional.
I was trying to understand the nature of it and whether there were two separate incomes or sources of income, and one was preserved and the other was adjusted upwards. So if it's a typo, then perhaps that should be reflected, or that technical error be corrected.
I believe that would be correct, ma'am, because it's my understanding that this whole section on rates was adjusted. Everything that was 4 went to 6. That was my understanding.
Senator Torres, do you have more?
No, that was all. I was just pointing out. It just triggered that question because I had pondered whether that was deliberate, and given what the previous speaker was talking about cause and effect, I wasn't sure that if this was the cause was some contractual or instance where we could not affect it.
All right, thank you. Is there any other senator that has a question for this panel?
Please no. Can we please be dismissed?
What is the desire of the body, Mr. Speaker?
I have some comments that I'm going to make and some amendments that I'm going to make to the legislation, but it doesn't necessitate them being here. They've
All
not.
right. Can we then move to dismiss the panel for right now and maybe have them on call? Is that okay, Lester and Mr. Camacho and Mr. Arreola? If
Well,
that's all right. Or did you want?
Why don't we dismiss them? We'll recess until 10 tomorrow morning.
All right. Can you please instruct the panel whether they need to return at 10 a.m.?
I'm not going to need them for my amendments.
All right.
If they
Perhaps
want
you
to
could
be
make
around,
yourself
that's
available
fine.
or give us your
But-
numbers and your own call. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. We can contact the panel tomorrow. Thank you very much. Recess until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.